A blessed day to everyone, especially to you, Ma'am Tabay. I am Erman Kalehara from Section PMGO1 and one of the members of Group 3. And today, together with my group mates, we are here virtually in front of you to discuss our assigned topics for our report in GE6 Art Appreciation, which are Realism, Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, and lastly, Neo-Impressionism. So in this session, we are going to provide you with a discussion of this art period or movements, some examples, how are they considered an art, and their historical and contemporary significance. So without further ado, let's start. So here are the members of Group 3. We have yours truly, Erman Colejara, Miss Desiree Aquino, Miss Honeyfel Caserva, Miss Lucy Decena, Mr. Jason De Los Santos, Miss Mary Jane Emawan, Miss Charis Navavos, Mr. Rexer Paduhinog, Miss Laika Pagador, Miss Lovely Shane Perez, and lastly we have Miss Christine Sinini. So before we proceed with the discussion proper, let's read our target objectives for this session first. At the end of this presentation, you are expected to first identify the defining characteristics and styles of the four modernism art movements. Second, appreciate the key artists and their arts in each art movement. And lastly, develop an understanding of their historical and contemporary significance as both art styles and movements. So together with Ms. Charis Navabos, we will be discussing the first topic, which is realism. First, let's define realism in art. The realism movement is one of the key art periods in human history during which artists engineered a profound shift in the way that art was created, defined, and conceptualized. The realism art movement originated in 19th century France due to the Industrial Revolution and the harsh realities birthed from it. During the 19th century, an art style known as Romanticism, which overemphasized the emotion and size of life, was in full swing. Realism art emerged as a direct opposition to both this extravagant romanticism and the unrealistic portrayals and techniques of other classical arts. Realism in art serves as a representation of the world as realistically as possible. It focuses on representing life in the ideals or more abstract concepts such as poverty and the working class. Realistic artworks show the viewer a scene from real life as if through a window. Working in a chaotic era marked by revolution and widespread social change, realist painters replaced the idealistic images and literary conceits of traditional art with real-life events, giving the margins of society similar weight to grand history, paintings, and allegories. Their choice to bring everyday life into their canvases was an early manifestation of the avant-garde desire to merge art and life, and their refusal of pictorial techniques like perspective prefigured the many 20th century definitions and redefinitions of modernism. So now that we have known the definition and overview of realism, let's proceed with its defining characteristics. First, we have the common subjects in realism. French artists initially used realism to sarcastically depict political issues and problems. Other artists incorporate realism by painting scenes of the working class, rural and urban life, and portraits dealing with the naked body. Artists strove to create works that were raw and natural, as close to a photograph as possible. Second, we have the importance of detail. Completely opposite of the soft look of Romantic Impressionism, realist painters include as much detail as possible in their work. Shadows, light reflecting off of surfaces, depth perception, and perspective need to be considered carefully to create a work that looks like a viewer could reach out and touch it. For both still life and light compositions, this meant capturing the subject with complete clarity. Number 3, we have the use of color. Early adopters of the realist style tended to incorporate warmer hues and color palettes in their works. Modern-day realists still use warm palettes, but play more with cooler color combinations to create startling effects. So now let's proceed with the famous realist artists and their artworks. Several 19th century French artists helped to establish the ground rules for realism with their paintings. Among the significant figures and artworks in the movement were number 1, Gustave Courbet. Often referred to as the father of realism in art, Gustave Courbet painted figures as he saw them, no matter how ordinary they may have been. He often spoke against the romanticization of the world through art and strove to represent the world emotionless through his paintings. One of his most famous paintings, The Stone Breakers in 1849, featured laborers with their faces turned away from the viewer, toiling in dirty clothes to create gravel for a road, depicting many of the features of realism paintings such as a focus on everyday workers and settings. Some of his artworks include The Desperate Man in 1845, A Burial at Ornans in 1850, and Jo, the Beautiful Irish Girl in 1866. Second, we have Jean-Francois Milot. Jean-Francois Milot came from Courbet and specialized in depictions of the poor farmers of the French countryside. He also detested Romanticism, so much so that he founded a school of artists dedicated to challenging the ideals of Romanticism called the Barbizon School. His 1857 painting, The Gleaners, focuses on the physical skill required by three women working in a wheat field. Like Courbet's The Stone Breakers in 1849, the painting is meant to depict both the hardships and the dignity of regular people at work, bringing empathy and recognition to their difficult station in life. Millet's other famous paintings include The Winnower in 1848, The Sower in 1850, and The Angelus in 1858. Number 3, we have Honoré Daumier. Daumier was a printmaker and painter whose caricatures captured the social, political, and economic differences between the city's upper and lower classes and drew attention to the difficult conditions under which many French citizens lived. His 1834 work Rue Transnona showed the aftermath of a riot in Paris in which government troops discharged their weapons on innocent bystanders while in pursuit of a suspect. Daumier's work would influence an offshoot of realist art called social realism, which flourished in the United States in the 19th and 20th centuries. Number 4, we have Rosa Bonheur. One of the most accomplished female realist painters of the 19th century, Bonheur's images of animals found the rough-hewn beauty of life in France's fields and farms. Her 1848 work, Flowing in the Nivernais, extended the depiction of natural conditions found in realism to the animals seen in everyday life. Her paintings of farmers and their oxen working in the field unapologetically depicts the reality of these works for both man and animal. Her other paintings include The Horse Fair in 1855 and Sheep by the Sea in 1865. Lastly, we have Edward Hopper, arguably the most famous figure in American realism. His paintings emphasize stillness, detachment, and distance. His 1942 painting, Nighthawks, which spies on the patrons and staff at a late night diner, is among the most recognized American art paintings. Other notable key artists of the realism movement were Edward Manet, James Whistler, John Singer Sargent, Thomas Eakins, Ilya Repin, and Henry Fantine Latour. These artists helped to establish the ground rules for realism with their paintings. So I guess that would be all for my part. I hope you have learned a lot from my discussion. And now I pass the floor to the next reporter, Miss Charis Navabos.
Good day, everyone. I am Charles Navabas, and today I am going to continue our topic about realism. After the movement of Neoclassicism came Romanticism, throwing away all those attributes that brought order to art. Romanticism threw away the conventions of classical style in favor of raw emotion and personal truth, passion, pain, and desire. But Romanticism would be thrown away soon thereafter by realism, casting out the focus on the wild emotions and whimsical desires of romantic movement. Realism focused on exactly that realism and portrayed everything, flaws and beauty alike. As a result of how it was depicted, realism was also known as illusionistic. As a result, illusionistic realism in the visual arts refers to the portrayal of subjects, their scenery, anatomy, as well as the light and color used for the depiction. Now let's talk about the history of realism. The year 1855 was significant in the establishment of realism in Europe. The term realism was coined by the French painter Gustave Courbet. It was the year in which he exhibited his work in Paris in the Pavillon de Realisme, a building that he himself paid for. He exhibited about 40 paintings, including a burial at Ornans and the Painter's Studio, which he had been refused by the jury of the Exposition Universelle, who instead hailed the work of more traditional masters such as Ingres. Courbet decided to display his paintings privately in his pavilion to the Realisme and to accompany its exhibition with a manifesto entitled Le Realisme. During the same period, in 1849, Jean-François Maillet left Paris and moved to Barbizon, a French village located near the forest Fontainebleau. In this village, the artist founded the Barbizon School. The school is active between 1830 and 1870, has seen the participation of several artists, among others Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot and Honoré Daumier, united by the desire of painting landscapes and making the nature and rural daily life the main subjects of their artworks. In the same year as Courbet's provocative debut, the painters of Barbizon School showed their art for the first time in a public exhibition. From the activity of the Barbizon School, Courbet's exhibition, and the naturalistic literary movement of Zola and Flaubert, the French Realism movement was born and spread around Europe during the 19th century. The French Realism influenced other movements, such as Impressionism and other groups. The Wanderers or Perevezhniki group of artists was considered Realism's counterpart in Russia. In Britain, artists such as Hubert von Herkomer and Loka Folders had great success with realistic paintings depicting social issues and representations of the real world, while the Ashcan School of New York, including George Bellows and Robert Henry, was considered American realism for its tendency to represent the daily life of the poorest members of society. Realism today is considered as one of the most important art movements of the 19th century. Now let's talk about realism in other art forms. As the realism art movement developed, it inspired the cultivation of a sense of realism in various other artistic movements. First, literature. When looking at realism as a literary movement, the writing was created was often based on objective reality. Romanticism was in part a reaction against the Industrial Revolution. As urbanization and factory production swept across Europe in 18th century, writers looked to nature as a way to reclaim a way of life that was being threatened. Similarly, increased economic inequality through the 19th century led Victorian writers to want to expose the horrors of poverty. Authors would place attention on showing the everyday activities and lives of those within the middle and lower class as accurately as possible. Write, Writings began to incorporate elements of realism and did not make use of any dramatization or idealization when capturing reality. The notable development of literary realism did not occur until the 1850s and was heavily inspired by the aesthetic works of the artist Gustave Courbet. The critical manifesto Le Realisme was written in 1857 by a popular French author who was known as Champollion, which went on to define realism in his writings. Other significant realist writers were both brothers Jules and Edmond Goncourt, who wrote Germinal Le Certeau in 1864. Within their writings, they explored various social and occupational contexts and set out to portray the social relations that existed amongst both the upper and lower class. Realism that entered literature emphasized the themes of separation, objectivity, and observation within writings. In addition, literature was also used to give a clear but restrained criticism and moral judgment of the social environment that existed. Next is theater. Realism within the theater first emerged in European drama during the 19th century in response to the impact of the Industrial Revolution and the advance in science. The purpose of realism in the theater was to bring focus on the psychological and social problems that occurred in the everyday life, with theoretical text and performances beginning to achieve greater authenticity when imitating real life. Dramas that incorporated realism abandoned the use of poetic language and fancy diction in favor of creating dialogue that looked and sounded like ordinary speech and behavior. Important realist dramatists include August Strindberg and Henrik Ibsen from Scandinavia, as well as Maxim Gorky and Anton Chekhov from Russia. Anton Chekhov made use of camera angles to reproduce a monotonous and analytic slice of life so as to expose the rhetorical and persuasive nature of realistic drama. These playwrights, along with many others, dismissed the complicated and artificial plot surrounding the well made play, instead of choosing to explore concepts and conflicts that occur in real life modern society. Lastly, in cinema. Similar to the development of literature and theater, cinema relied greatly on the 19th century realism movement for structure and thematic material. However, the essence of film has managed to lend itself to a type of realism that can be found midway between life and fiction. One of the most famous cinematic realism movements is Italian neorealism, a group of low-budget films shot on location in post-war Italy. Neorealism developed after the World War II in Italy, with films beginning to focus on portraying current social issues. Films that fell into this bracket of neorealism tried to create documentary like impartiality by making use of ordinary people in leading roles and including sections of real documentary recordings into the story. Two types of film realism existed, namely seamless realism and static realism. Within seamless realism, filmmakers use various film techniques and narrative structures to create the illusion of reality, which help to maintain the movie's genuineness. Aesthetic realism acknowledged that multiple realisms existed and used a combination of amateur actors, natural lighting, and locations. Other famous films movements that have tried to present realistic scenarios of peoples, places, and eras include the French New Wave of late 1950s and 60s, the New Hollywood movement of the early 1970s, and the late 1990s Danish film movement, Dogme 95. This was done so viewers could form their own opinions based on the film as opposed to being manipulated into the favored interpretation. And their aim was to show the reality of poor and working class people through a new generation of filmmakers. Now let's talk about the significance of realism. First is realism reflects the real life situations in different period of time. Because realism used normal people from all social classes in contemporary, everyday situations as subject matter. Artists tried to represent these people in a truthful and accurate way, not glossing over the more unpleasant aspects of life. They felt the reach of art was very limited and can be understood by elite people only. They wanted to take the art to more common people. This they felt can be done only when the art reflects the real life situations. Another one is it encouraged various movements in other art forms, where there was a hint of realism. These movements involved the opera style of Veresmo, literary realism, theatrical realism, and Italian neorealist cinema. These contemporary art movements include photorealism and hyperrealism, wherein photorealism aims to present a painting that looks exactly like a photograph, and hyperrealism often combines realistic images with an element of something that is unreal but still looks real because of the techniques with which it has been rendered. Lastly, realism offers artists a starting point from which they can launch themselves into an infinite number of artistic styles. It is the backbone for quality art education. They control color and temperature and understand exactly what they're doing and learn that through realistic painting. Artists know what they want to produce and have the skills and understanding of the art components. The importance of realism art is evident if one understands and can masterfully replicate reality. Then they can have true control over abstraction or any other visual representation in art. Thus, realism art is important, or realism, is important not only in its own right in developing art as a photographic likeness of its subject, but it also drew attention to working class Europeans by virtue of its focus on the development of art. So that's all for my part. Thank you for listening. Hope you understand something. And we will go over to the.
Good day, everyone. This is Jason De Los Santos together with Lucy Decena and Laika Pagador from section Prophet Isaiah. This is our task for our art appreciation subject to explain what is post-impressionism all about. This is the definition of post-impressionism. It refers to a genre of painting that rejected the naturalism of Impressionism in favor of using color and form in more expressive manners. The term post-impressionism was coined by British artist and art critic Roger Fry in 1910 to describe the development of French art since Manet. It was an art movement that began in late 1880s. A group of artists were trying to move away from a naturalism of Impressionist art. These artists were going in a more independent road to express emotion in their pieces. Post-Impressionist artists belonging to a genre which extended the style of Impressionism while rejecting its limitation. They continued using vivid colors, thick application of paint, and real-life subject matter, but they were more inclined to emphasize geometric forms to distort form for more expressive effect. The next reporter, Ms. Lucy Decena, will provide an example of it.
Hello everyone, I'm Lucy Lucena and here are some examples of post-impressionism. First, we have where do we come from and what we are, where are we going? In French, D'où nous, cuisimeno, venunu. The location is Museum of Fine Arts. So you can find this art in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, US. And the artist is Paul Gauguin in year 1898. According to Gauguin, this painting should be read from right to left with the three major figure groups illustrating the question posed in the title. It is not only the most colossal canvas that Gauguin painted in his entire life, but it is also the art which explains in the details the entire philosophical and pictorial doctrine of the artist. Second, we have the dream. So in French, La Vie. So the location is the Museum of Modern Arts in New York City, US. So the artist is Henry Rousseau in 1910. So the dream was exhibited a few months before the death of Henry Rousseau, a self-taught genius during his lifetime. So it is the last complete work of Rousseau in the largest of his jungle paintings. So the painting was later much celebrated by the Surrealists, whose art valued surprising just a position and dreamlike moods. And lastly, we have the Yellow Christ. In French, Le Christ d'Ajout. So location is Albright Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo, New York, US. And the artist is Paul Gauguin, year 1889. So along with the Christ Green, this painting by Gauguin is among the first and most important works of symbols in painting. So the Yellow Christ shows the crucifixion of Christ taking place in 19th century northern France while women are gathered in prayers. The painting is noted for various symbolism, like the man running in the ground reflect the 19th century desire to run away from the city life and get back to the primitive and much similar life that was before. So that's all for my part, and now I'm going to pass the floor to the next reporter.
Hello everyone, I am Laika Ira A. Pagador. Today I am going to discuss to you about the significance of the post-impressionism as well as how it is considered as an art. Post-impressionism art movement, like the impressionism, is considered to be one of the earliest avant-garde movements of the 19th century. The concerns of the major and most influential painters and sculptors that helped to create the Impressionism style produced the artworks that focused on the investigation of the perception of the eye. The presentation of the shifting nature of light and the depictions of the everyday life in the streets, parks, cafes, and bars. But what is post-impressionism? Following from the predecessors of the Impressionism movement, post-Impressionism was the next generation of the avant-garde artists that took a variety of different approaches. But what glued them together was their rejection of the focus on the opticality of the Impressionism movement. Emerging as a reaction against the Impressionists' concern for the naturalistic depiction of light and color, post-Impressionists fought to bring back the focus on the subject matter and the structure in paintings that they felt was lost. Dominated by the immense personalities such as Paul Gauguin, Paul Cézanne, George Seurat, Vincent van Gogh, and Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, the post-impressionists took different approaches and continued building on the advances of the previous art movement. Moving on, let's talk about the significance of post-impressionism. Emerging as a reaction against the Impressionist concern for the naturalistic depiction of light and color, and Impressionists fought back to bring back the focus on the subject matter and the structure in paintings that they felt was lost, post-Impressionists both extended Impressionism while rejecting its limitations. The artists continued using vivid colors, a thick application of paint and real-life subject matter, but were more inclined to emphasize geometric forms, distort forms for an expressive effect, and use unnatural and seemingly random colors. Post-Impressionism is important because it shows the art does not have to be held to the same standards as what has been produced before. Impressionists found themselves fighting against the established norms in French art. The popular art during the time of the Impressionists was history paintings. Now let's talk about how does post-impressionism considered as an art. An art in our previous discussion is generally understood as any activity or product done by a people or a certain people with a communicative or aesthetic purpose, something that expresses an idea, an emotion, or more generally, a worldview. It is a component of culture reflecting economic and social substrates in its design. Post-impressionism is one of the products done by people with a communicative and aesthetic purpose to express an artist's idea, emotion, and their worldview. It is created with imagination and skill, and that is beautiful or that expresses important ideas or feelings, and that is why it is considered as an art. And that would be all with my discussion. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something.
Good day, everyone. My name is Christine Amsnining, and I'm from Group G. And my science topic was all about Impressionism. So for today, I will discuss what is Impressionism, what is the main idea of Impressionism, its background or its history, and I will also discuss its origin and period. Alright, so without any further ado, allow me to proceed. So, what does Impressionism in art means? So, the word Impressionism refers to a painting movement that originated in France in the middle to late 19th century. So, characteristics of the movement include unblended color, an emphasis on the accurate representation of natural light, and small, visible brush strokes that offer the bare impression of form. And we have the second one. What is the main idea of Impressionism? So, Impressionists rebelled against classical subject matter and embraced modernity, desiring to create works that reflected the world in which they lived. Uniting them was a focus on how light could define a moment in time, with color providing definition instead of black lines. And we have the third one, Impressionism background or its history. So the late 1080s saw the start of radical art movement known as Impressionism, which was predominantly composed of Parisian painters. So Impressionists rejected traditional subjects and embraced modernity in their quest to produce art that accurately captured their time. And we have the fourth one, the origin of Impressionism. So beginning in the early 1860s, Claude Monet and other Paris-based artists created Impressionism. So, however, John Constable can be created with having invented the practice in Britain in the period between 1813 and 1817, as a result of his ambition to portray nature realistically. And lastly, for its period, so the artwork created between roughly 1867 and 1886 by a group of artists who shared a number of similar ideas and techniques is referred to as Impressionist painting. That would be all for my reporting, and I hope that you've learned something. That would be all. Thank you.
Good day everyone, I am Desiree Aquino and today I will discuss about Impressionism art characteristics. The first characteristic is the quick loose brush strokes. This is likely the Impressionism art characteristic that is most frequently discussed and most easily identified. An Impressionist painting's unique, small, and loose brush strokes can be seen when you zoom in on it. This is due to the fact that the artist frequently lacks sufficient time to complete these images. The focus of Impressionist artworks is not on the fine details. Instead, Impressionists are trying to capture a moment or an impression. And in so doing, they move quickly without much detail, as the artist's hand moves across the canvas with quick brush strokes. This is why you can often see individual strands of the paintbrush being used in an Impressionist piece. The second Impressionism art characteristics is the bright paintings. Colors and brightness varied according to the artist and the period of the movement. But in general, Impressionism art had a lot of brightness. The art movement prior to Impressionism was Realism. Black, gray, and brown were frequently utilized by the artists throughout the Realism movement, which produced darker, more earthy paintings. Impressionist artists used light ground colors or even unprimed canvases. In addition, they used colors from the light spectrum in their paintings, like red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and indigo and violet. Finally, they didn't blend their colors on the canvas. They would often paint complementary colors next to each other to give the painting a more vibrant, alive feeling. This led to the creation of colorful, bright, and dynamic paintings by combining use from the light spectrum on this light ground rather than mixing the colors, but frequently painting complementary colors close to each other. The third Impressionism art characteristic is called en plein air, which refers to painting outdoors. Paintings prior to Impressionism were usually completed in some sort of studio. Studios were controlled environments, often with models and apprentices involved. It was unheard of at the time, but Impressionists chose to move their canvases outside. The Impressionists wanted to capture a moment in time and the feeling of impression of that moment. In order to do so, they needed to be unseen. So they painted en plein air, meaning out in the open. As a result, Impressionism features numerous landscapes and outdoor subjects. The use of relative color is the fourth characteristic of Impressionism art. This is the opposite of local color. The term local color refers to the color an object would naturally appear in neutral white light. The colors we commonly associate with objects can also be considered a form of local color. For example, the sun is yellow, the grass is green, the sea is blue. Impressionist painters disliked to use local color in capturing the moment they were painting. They painted the scene as they saw it. The artists wanted to depict objects in the light that they saw at certain times of day or in a certain environments. So these objects didn't necessarily have colors you would naturally associate with them, but what they look like as the Impressionists were painting en plein air. Water could be purple, grass could be blue. This is called relative color. The fifth characteristic of Impressionism art is the clearer picture from farther away. The paintings become clearer the farther away you are physically from the canvas. The closer you view Impressionism art, the less clear the painting becomes and the more chaotic it gets. As you get close to the canvas, you see the artist's hand in every individual brush stroke and glob of paint, but the painting lacks detail. As you move farther away from the painting, the scene, the emotion, and the details become clearer. So that's my topic all about. I hope you have learned something from it. Thank you and have a good day.
Knowing that Impressionism describes a style of painting developed in France during the mid to late 19th century, Impressionism is important because it shows that art does not have to be held to the same standards as what has been produced before. Impressionists found themselves fighting against the established norms in French art. The popular art during the time of the Impressionists was history paintings. The rise of Impressionism can be seen in part as a response by artists to the newly established medium of photography. In the same way that the Japonism focused on everyday life, photography also influenced the Impressionist interest in capturing a snapshot or ordinary people doing everyday things. Impressionists strongly emphasize the effects of light in their paintings. They use short, thick strokes of paint to capture the essence of the object rather than the subject details. Quickly applied brush strokes give the painterly illusion of movement and spontaneity.
Good day everyone, my name is Lovely Shane Perez and our report for today is all about Neo-Impressionism, along with my partners, members, Caserva Hanifel and Drexer Paduhinog. So first, what is Neo-Impressionism? So the Neo-Impressionist art of Georges Seurat, Paul Signac, and his successors who were influenced by optical theory used tiny neighboring dots of primary color to stimulate light. This is also known as Neo-Impressionism. So the diversionist technique is a hallmark of Neo-Impressionism. This is often popularly but incorrectly called pointillism. So divisionism used an optical combination of colors in an effort to scientifically ground Impressionist paintings of light and color. The primary color components of each color were placed separately on the canvas in tiny daubs so they would mix in the viewer's eye rather than being combined in a palette, which lessens intensity. Since colors that are optically blended tend to go toward white, this procedure produced more luminosity. Neo-Impressionism movement in French painting of the late 19th century that reacted against the empirical realism of Impressionism by relying on systematic calculation and scientific theory to achieve predetermined visual effects. The Neo-Impressionism used scientific optical principles of light and color to create strictly codified or codified compositions in contrast to the Impressionist painters who instinctively captured nature in terms of the fugitive effects of color and light. Neo-Impressionism was led by Georges Seurat, who was its original theorist and most significant artist, and by Paul Signac, also an important artist and the movement's major spokesman. Henri Edmond Cross, Albert Dubois Pelé, Maximilien Luz, Theo van Rysselberg, and for a while Impressionist painter Camille Pissarro were additional Neo-Impressionist painters. In 1894, the group established the Société des Artistes Indépendants. And this is my part for the topic of Neo-Impressionism. The next reporter will be Rexer Paduhinog. Thank you so much.
Good day everyone, I am Rexer Paduhinog and for the continuation, we have here one good example of Neo-Impressionism artwork. The name Divisionism and Pointillism were first used to describe Seurat's painting method, which involved dotting paint with constructing colors on the canvas. Based on optical theory, a calculated pattern of colored dots was created with the goal of having the retina recognize a single color. These dots covered the entire painting, defining form without the need of lines and illuminating everything with a vibrant, powerful light. Each artwork has identically single dots that were chosen to complement the scale of the overall painting. Neo-Impressionism substituted solid, clear and simplified shapes for Impressionism's hazy ones in order to highlight the meticulously planned relationship between them. Despite of dazzling light quality evoking Impressionism, the overall impression was one of immovable, harmonious monumentality, a crystallization of impressions, ephemeral light. For the continuation and the last part, we have Miss Hanifel Caserva. And have a great day, everyone.
Hi, good day everyone. I am here to give you some examples of Neo-Impressionism. Signac's later work showed an increasingly spontaneous use of divisionist technique, which was more consistent with his poetic sensibility. But before that, I will introduce to you who is Signac. So Paul Signac was born on November 11, 1863 in Paris, France, and he died on August 15, 1935 in Paris. He is a French painter who was with Georges Seurat developed the technique called pointillism. When he was 18, Signac gave up the study of architecture for painting and through Armand Guillaumin became a convert to coloristic principles of Impressionism. In 1884, Signac helped found the Salon des Indépendants. There he met Seurat, whom he initiated into the broken color technique of Impressionism. The two went on to develop the methods they called pointillism, which became the basic of Neo-Impressionism. As had the Impressionists, but they adopted an exact, almost scientific systems of applying the dots instead of somewhat intuitive applications of the earlier masters. In watercolors, Signac used the principle in much freer manner. After 1886, he took part regularly in the annual Salon des Indépendants, to which he sent landscape, seascapes, and decorative panels. And being a sailor, Signac traveled widely along the European coast, painting the landscape he encountered. In his later years, he painted scenes of Paris, Viviers, and other French cities. Signac produced much critical writing and was author of From Eugene Delacroix to Neo-Impressionism's 1899 and Jonkind 1927. The former book is an exposition of pointillism, while the latter is an insightful treatise of watercolor painting. Seurat, however, continued to adopt a theoretical approach to the study of various pictorial and technical problems, including a reduction of the expressive qualities of colors and form to scientific formulas. By the 1890s, the influence of Neo-Impressionism was waning, but it was important in the early stylistic and technical development of several artists of the late 19th and early 20th century, including Vincent van Gogh, Paul Gauguin, Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, and Henri Matisse. That would be all, and thank you.